Hello and welcome to After Scientology, Straight Up and Vertical, the weekly show where Tony Ortega and I get together and we talk about the week's events in the world of Scientology as reported on Tony's Substack. Hey, Tony, welcome back.
Thank you very much, Chris. Great to be here.
Yeah. Well, there are periods between, and I think we're kind of in one of those periods right now where things are happening and then there are stories and things to talk about, and we're going to do that. But, it's kind of those between those tent pole moments, you know what I mean? When we have judgments on cases or there's some new escapee or something dramatic, but there's still stuff that happens. And if you keep track during these times, it paints a bigger picture that's often quite interesting. So just wanted to throw that out there for the audience. This week, we had some coverage of things, starting with Paris Ideal Org opening and some, shall we say, hyperbole connected with this? What do we got here?
Yeah, we've been real interested in this Ideal Org program, and whenever there's a new one, we pay a lot of attention. And this time we were fortunate. David Miscavige had really been hyping up the Paris in particular. He also, these are the orgs that were ready to go, basically, but we were waiting for the pandemic to be done. And so he opened 4 in quick succession: Austin, Mexico City, Chicago, and then Paris. And then we were real fortunate because a couple people were over there. Pete Griffiths was there, and Alex Barnes Ross was there. Had a lot of fun, talking to them about what they saw. And one of the controversies that came out of it was whether David Miscavige actually physically was there.
That's right.
And we're pretty sure he went out a week early, filmed something, but that was not there the day of the actual event, and they tried to fake it. We have some pretty good evidence. You and I have talked about that.
Yep.
So, then what happens then is that always these ideal orgs have an early period where they try their best to look busy because they want to win the birthday game. And then inevitably they just fall into, inactivity. I mean, whether you're talking, Seattle or Phoenix or wherever you go back now and they're just like dead. But
right.
So we expected that all 4 of those would be doing their best at least to have a busy first year. But what I wasn't expecting is this new Impact magazine came out and it had a couple stories about the Paris org, and I was kind of curious because I thought maybe it might say something about Miscavige, but it didn't really. But what it said was, it was so over the top. Like, this is it. This is the ideal org. This is the one, right? And it was kind of funny because it's trying to make it sound like it's having this huge impact on the city of Paris. But then if you read it kind of carefully, it's more like, no, the guy down at the corner shop is like real happy we're in the neighborhood. It's just, they're trying to dress it up. They had some photos of people they claimed were like the first new clear at the new org, and that they've made some more clears and all that. They're going to try real hard initially to make it look like it's busy. But I just thought the language was really over the top. And I don't know. It just came off very fake, didn't it, Chris?
Oh, my God. Completely so. I was actually thrown back to, oh, God, who was that guy? The speechwriter who...
Dan Sherman?
Dan Sherman, that's right. I was a little thrown back to Dan Sherman times. And since that momentous event, let me read this one paragraph from this. Yeah. And since that momentous event, the org has been a force in this cultural capital, buzzing with life, introducing the curious to Scientology, welcoming neighborhood merchants and workers, ushering French Scientologists up the bridge, and mobilizing hundreds of volunteers for a series of outreach campaigns, which will soon expand to Olympic proportions.
Yeah.
And that's why all the hype is, because the Olympics is coming up and Paris needs to be front and center, just like Utah was years ago when they did the games there. And I'm saying that it's going to be the same level of disaster. These guys are toxic in the public eye. Yeah. And no amount of ushering French Scientologists up the bridge or mobilizing hundreds of volunteers is going to change that. And I just had to laugh at the mobilizing hundreds of volunteers because I know what that means. That means they're desperately calling everybody on their address list to try to get them to come back into the org, and most of them aren't picking up the phone. So that's what's really going on in the real world, but they describe it, in these flowery, over the top nonsense. It's just hilarious.
Well, I mean, one of the things we learned from Pete and Alex being there and some other journalists that were there was they were like, this is not a very nice part of Paris, and it's kind of out of the way.
Yeah.
Which fits, when they were first doing Ideal Org starting in 2003, so 20 years ago, they were still sticking by the Hubbard idea that you wanted to be a historical building right downtown with tons of foot traffic. So all you got to do is walk outside and corral people in.
That's right.
For the new beat, what do they call it? Body routing, right?
Yep.
And that was the idea, is it has to be front and center. It's got, like the Hollywood stuff. It's, right in people's faces. But then I noticed, I don't know, 10 years ago or something, when we started seeing some of these new Ideal Orgs, that they were really out of the way. The Silicon Valley one, for example, you can't even get to if you wanted to. You'd have to drive around through a neighborhood and come in through a back. It's just crazy how tucked away it was. And then I remember hearing that the Perth Ideal Org is literally in a business park.
It is
like in a warehouse,
Yep.
So I mean, we saw Albuquerque, they've got this big building way out on the edge of town. So Miscavige basically gave up on that whole downtown street traffic, foot traffic thing. And that's the case with the Paris org. I mean, it's a very nice building, but it's out of the way. People aren't going to be walking by it. So what they say is, yeah, but the biggest highway in the country goes right by it. People zooming by in their cars are going to see the Scientology sign, try to find an exit and go over and take a personality test. I mean, it's just not, so I agree with you. The language in there just really is way, way over inflated. And they'll do their best to make all these Scientologists, because look, all the Scientologists back in the U.S., they paid for it. They paid for it with their IS dues, right?
That's right.
So they need to be told, hey, it's going great, it's going wonderful, but
that's right.
That place will be empty. I mean, France doesn't like Scientology anyway.
Well, with a name like the IAS, it has to be good. Yeah, I mean, and that actually is a pressure point. I mean, these donors, they do expect to see some return on investment. They are made very flowery promises when they give over those hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. They really are. Yeah. They are not giving that money over with a nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Aha, this is just for tax deduction. They really do expect that something's supposed to happen with it. And that's another reason why the flowery language. All right. So now L. Ron Hubbard 2.0, there were some shenanigans this week from this. And from your reporting, what was the story on the update here?
Well, I'm just fascinated by this phenomena because I do pay attention to the independent Scientologists. These are the Scientologists that have left the church, but are still into Hubbard. They're still into technology. They do auditing on their own. They go up bridge. I'm interested because they will talk openly about things that church members keep under wraps.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting to see that at least a small percentage of them have really bought into this idea that this guy, Justin Craig, is the reincarnated L. Ron Hubbard, and he legally changed his name to Lafayette Ronald Hubbard. And I revealed a few years ago that he's a Justin Craig ex-convict who, was in prison in California for a while. And now he's sitting in a jail in Tennessee. He's been there for 2.5 years. And I knew they were from some fairly serious charges because he's on like a $500,000 bond. But it wasn't until a couple of weeks ago that I finally got the actual papers from the court spelling out the allegations against him. And like I said, they're pretty brutal. I mean, he was supposedly dealing some very bad, serious drugs like fentanyl from a cheap motel room. And the woman that was staying with, he brutalized her. I mean, the injuries they describe are terrible. Yeah. And then he got put in jail. And then since then, he's beat up jail guards. One of the guards he actually was choking with a T-shirt. So he's facing some pretty serious charges. And I don't know, maybe it's because maybe his followers haven't seen that spelled out. But after I published those indictments, a few days later, he started sending these new messages to his followers at this Facebook group, and it was kind of wild. I just decided, I let people see him and decide for themselves. But I mean, he was talking about maybe I should quit. Maybe I won't be L. Ron Hubbard anymore.
Yeah.
And then he was talking about CIA interference and just wild stuff. And then I've heard from you. I will stay L. Ron Hubbard. In fact, I have more certainty on my past life than ever before. I mean, just wild stuff, and that's fine. That's he's got his little thing he's doing, but it's amazing to me that anybody falls for this guy, Chris.
Yeah. Yeah.
What does that say
really
about indie Scientologists? I mean, I know not all of them, a smaller portion, but
well, it says a lot, and I've always talked about how this whole thing is driven by people's emotional needs. They're not thinking, they're feeling their way through this, and that's very much what belief systems and cults and stuff are all about. And this is such a great example. It's such a little microcosm of the bigger Scientology picture. And I'll tell you why I think it's a real adventure reading through his texts and stuff. You will see what we're talking about. And his attitude about it and the way he has convinced them that he is L. Ron Hubbard, but he didn't have all his memories back yet. And this could help explain. I mean, it was a real stroke of genius, some of this stuff. And then, but here's the thing he's giving these people that no one else is, including David Miscavige. He's giving them new tech, new procedures, and they're running them, and they're having wins on them, just like they're expected to, just like Scientology does, right? It only works because you're primed to make it work. But that's what they want. They want that kick. They need that auditing kick, right? That fix. And that's what he's giving them.
Let me tell you the wrinkle he's adding in particular. Oh God. If you're somebody like me that has to wade through a lot of pseudoscience nonsense, imagine you already have this wacky L. Ron Hubbard technology about body thetans and operating thetan levels and stuff. The wrinkle he's putting in there that they're digging is quantum mechanics. Right?
Of course.
Which of course, I'm telling you, people, unless you're talking to a theoretical physicist, and there's not that many around, as soon as you hear the word quantum out of somebody's mouth, you should run, because
that's right.
people don't know what it is, and so they just pretend it means everything.
Yep.
And so now they're doing quantum operating thetan levels, and it means this. I watched one of the videos, Chris. It's the stupidest thing I've ever seen, but to them, it's all mystical, and because that's all quantum means to them, is something mystical. Yep. It must be. It's like energy this and quantum that. And so they're buying into that, and they like that. And instead of auditing, they call it phasing. And instead of Scientology, it's called Asperianism.
Right.
But yeah, it's just absolute ludicrous nonsense that means nothing. And they don't even know what the word means. So, but like you said, it fills a need for some people. There are still people sending him money every month.
Yep.
That was one of the things he was talking about this week. Is like, I'm gonna stop being L. Ron Hubbard, but don't stop sending me money.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Did you catch that? That's right.
He changed his mind on that. He's still L. Ron Hubbard, and he still wants your money. So
yeah. Oh yeah. This con is not ending as long as he keeps getting the checks or the cash from these people. And it's true. It's true. When you read through his own writings, by the way, you'll see how disturbed this man is. And he talks about his own problems in prison with what he's been doing there. So, all right, let's move on here. Whitney Mills, this case, new lawsuit filed last week. What do we got happening from the church on this?
Right. So, I first wrote about the Whitney Mills situation in December 2022. I'd gotten the police reports, and it was just terrible what had happened to this woman. But it was an incomplete story. Based on the police reports, there was a lot of holes in the story. Tracy McManus, about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, wrote the story that there was now a lawsuit from Whitney's mother, spelling out that she was this really mentally disturbed OT8. And she had this other OT8 handler who was, they were trying to figure out how to deal with just real depression she was going through, real pain. Unfortunately, she went to the quack David Minkoff, Rebecca Minkoff's father, who was also involved in the Lisa McPherson case. He diagnosed her with three things she didn't have:
Yep.
some parasite, some fantasy version of Lyme disease. I'm not saying Lyme disease isn't real. Lyme disease is very real, but there's kind of a fantasy version of it that a lot of these quacks talk about.
Yep.
And then also cancer. She was told she had ovarian cancer. She didn't. And with all these horrible problems she's facing, really mentally disturbed, her OTA handler told her, you need to get the assist to drop the body. And so she was talking to her friends about that. I need the assist to drop the body. And then she dropped her body, Chris. She ended her life.
Yep.
So now the mother is suing, wrongful death lawsuit, saying, look, Scientology had an obligation to help this woman and direct her to some actual health care, not tell her to drop her body. So this week, what we got was a response from Scientology, not a legal response to the lawsuit, simply a public statement it put out, angry statement, saying that there is no such thing as an assist to drop the body, nothing like it, nothing. It's all a fabrication. They blamed anti-Scientologists for the lawsuit, which I didn't understand. The only thing I see in the lawsuit is a caring mother and a personal injury attorney in Miami who took the case.
Yep.
Nobody else mentioned in there, so I don't know what they're talking about there.
Yep.
But they said there's no such thing as drop the body, and that the people caring for her were not employees of the church. Well, see, they're playing word games there. So I called up Claire Headley, I called up Mike Rinder, and they were both saying this is ridiculous. Of course, every Scientologist knows about the concept of dropping the body. They're playing word games. No, there's no like HCOB about it, but Hubbard did refer to this in his advices that not everybody got to see.
Yep.
And so it's a little bit tricky, but look, I'm sure Claire or Mike would be happy to come into court and testify and say, yes, all of us as Scientologists knew about this whole drop the body concept. And this is why I think that statement from Scientology is so angry, because they know this is going to be so bad for them. I can't imagine Miscavige allowing it to get to a trial. But so we talked about that this week, and then I got a bunch of other responses from people. Sonny Pereira sent in a wonderful post that I put up about an 89-year-old woman in the RPF who was asked to drop the body and she refused. Great little anecdote. But yeah, I mean, this is stirring up a lot of interesting stuff. And I think it's just, it's going to get more and more interesting as we see how Scientology does respond to it legally. They have been served. I have checked on that, Chris, and all the defendants have been served. They're just the institutions, not David Miscavige this time, but FSO, the Bel Air mission, the Tampa org. They've all been served, and they have to answer the lawsuit. So that's good. But I think this public statement was maybe a preview of how the church is going to try to deal with this. And it's just a very angry thing. And they kind of blame the mother, which I thought was way over the line.
Yeah, big time. Well, I hope that this thing gets far enough along that the Lisa McPherson echoes of this are made public knowledge, because that's really what, as far as I'm concerned, that's the central, core problem here. And Scientology's outrage is probably a little bit of, their response to that too. They know the liability of this.
Well, I think we said it last week, Chris, that this shows they haven't learned a damn thing since Lisa McPherson, 1995.
That's right.
And I thought it was interesting that their response did not mention Minkoff at all, didn't even allude to him. I asked Claire, I said, does that mean they're about to throw him under the bus? And she said not necessarily, because he and Rebecca have given millions of dollars to Scientology. They're probably fine and protected by the church. But he is going to face a medical malpractice lawsuit. And I want to see that one too, because, I mean, this guy is just... this is not the only case I know of where he's misdiagnosing people. And I think the reason that he's still in business, all these years after 29 years since the Lisa McPherson thing, is that he victimizes other Scientologists. They're not going to complain about it.
Yep.
So anyway, it's
Yeah, I think
very
that's
interesting,
probably,
very interesting response from Scientology, and I thought Claire and Mike and Sonny had some great response, and I heard from a lot of other people too. A lot of people are really riled up about this. They're
yep.
really interested in talking about the whole drop the body thing and what Hubbard meant by it. So I think we're going to see a lot about this going forward.
Absolutely, and there's no question that from my experience, this existed in the Sea Org culture, and in a way, at the public level as well, and at the staff level. There was open talk about this on the base and at the sea when I was in the Sea Org. And while it is true that one time a top technical person actually did issue a dispatch to the base or to somebody on the base, I remember seeing this, that said, look, there is no drop the body assist as such. She never saw those advices. I know that for a fact. And two, it was in the culture. This thing, even going back to R245.
Right. And a number of people have brought up R245 to me. And let me just state for the record, because anytime I've treated R245 seriously, I always get an email from an ex-Scientologist saying, "Oh, that was a joke. You're a joke to take it seriously." No, here's what I researched that a little bit. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There's no question that at a lecture, a demonstration, I believe it was in Philadelphia. I might be wrong on that.
Mm.
When they were talking about exteriorization, and Hubbard was talking about how hard it can be to get somebody to exteriorize, at some point he literally pulled out a pistol
Yep.
and fired into the stage saying, "There's another way that never fails to exteriorize." And that back then they had all these different processes called R2 this and R2 this, and he called it R245. Now, was he serious? Were they going to kill anybody? That after that, there was this notice put in Ability Magazine or one of those Scientology publications saying that with a list of people's names saying that these people were subject to R245.
Yep.
People always point to that. Okay, so what's going on? Well, I found some other early writings in like the Abery and stuff like that, and some interviews that were done by the FDA when it was investigating Scientology in that period. And what became clear to me was, yes, Hubbard was making a point. He was, making an over-the-top point on stage, but that he clearly used that notion of R245 to intimidate people he wanted to intimidate.
Yep.
I don't think Scientology ever used that on anybody. I don't think Hubbard himself ever really would have, but I don't think there's any question that some of those early Dianeticists in the late 50s were intimidated by the idea of, hey, there's R245, and it was used to scare people.
Yeah.
So that's the extent of that. I don't know that it's quite the same thing as telling a Scientologist that you need to drop the body.
It's not.
I think that's a separate thing.
No, you're right about that. It absolutely is a separate thing as far as that goes. I think I was just thinking about forceful exteriorization, but the idea. But let me clarify, because beyond R245, there were instances where this would come up culturally, right, between Scientologists. People getting old, infirm, terminal illness, deformity, accidents, where there's real body damage, but the person's still alive. Person goes into a coma, vegetative states, all the way to that. These would come up in conversation, and it would always without fail, the answer was, oh, the person's absolutely better off dropping the body and going and getting another one. Because remember that in Scientology, death is not final. Death is nothing in Scientology. That's part of what you have to understand about this, is that they think you're going to go get another body. Right. You're not going anywhere.
And the real problem is that between those lives, the invader forces come and grab you, erase your memory, drop you off in the Gulf of Mexico. You get a new body, and unfortunately, you've forgotten who you were. And it's only Scientology that can help you recover your whole track so you can remember who you are, so that ultimately you can become an operating Thetan, OT8 or above, and then resist the between life
You
implanting
got it.
and go from lifetime to lifetime remembering who you are. There
That's
it is, people. That is the ultimate Scientology story. And I know those folks that only went to grade 1 and left will tell you, well, it's just a self-help group. It's not. No. There is a overarching story from L. Ron Hubbard, and that is it. Become an operating Thetan, get godlike powers, and be able to go lifetime to lifetime remembering who you are.
That's right. Exactly. Literally, OT8 handles the reason for amnesia on the whole track is the statement, top level of the bridge. And that shockingly is where Whitney Mills was when she went mentally unstable. And
right. And that's spelled out in the lawsuit that was so frustrating for her and so hurtful for her. She's like, I'm OT8. I should not be going through this.
That's right.
I'm in so much pain. I'm in so much misery. This is not supposed to be happening at OT8. Well, drop the body and, do something else. And it's like horrible. None of those people could just say, hey, why don't you go see a therapist?
Exactly.
Maybe they have a little medication to help calm you down.
That's right.
Can't do it.
Nope. Those are closed off paths. There are acceptable other practices in Scientology, is what they label it. If you're not doing straight Scientology, you can't go off and do magnets or auras or chakras. You can't do any of that stuff. That's all other practices. And you can't go do medicine, psychiatry or psychology, verboten, forget it. They don't have.
Well, and that's another thing that's in that statement, that angry statement from the church. They repeatedly say there's nothing against getting medical care in Scientology. They're being cute.
Yep.
That's not what she needed. What she needed was psychiatric care. And there absolutely is a prohibition against that in Scientology.
That's right. And that is medical care. We're talking about psychiatrists who are doctors first.
Right. Yeah.
So they really are being cute with that because they have their own idea of what medical is, and they don't include psychiatry or psychology in that. So, right. Okay. Anyway, I just wanted to kind of put my own 2 cents in on that one because it's a big topic in Scientology, and death was something that I used to actually not take seriously because of those beliefs. They were comforting in one end, but on the other hand, they can be used in a very abusive way, as we see here. Ugh. Okay. So, as I always ask at this time, how are we doing for this week? Any previews?
This week, well, I think I'm going to dig into a little bit of this whole Tom Cruise thing that's been going on. I try not to get into it too much, but the Sun called me a few days ago and had a pretty good, for the Sun, had a pretty good piece about Suri's prom and all that, and quoted me, but they really stayed away from the key idea that I told them. And so I think I'm going to talk about that a little bit this week about, there's something very important to keep in mind when you see Tom Cruise partying at a Taylor Swift concert instead of being in London, instead of being in New York at his daughter's graduation. There's something specific to understand about that really the Sun missed. And I gave it to them, but they didn't use it. Other people have. It's not a huge deal. I think most of our readers kind of know it. But I think that this is a good moment to dig into that, and I may have something to do with that. But I don't know. I'm working on some long-term things, Chris. I'm working hard.
All right, man. Well, no worries. Me too. All right. So with all of that, then I will tell our viewers here, you see Tony's Substack address right there on the screen. Subscribe, get your daily notifications, and then catch up with us for the weekly summaries. And do that, of course, by subscribing to my channel. All right. I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.